So today, Dr. Payaslian is going to talk about Daniel Varoujan at the University of Ghent from 1905 to 1909. Professor Payaslian is a Charles K. and Elizabeth M. Kenosian Chair in Modern History and Literature at Boston University. He's the author of Political Economy of Human Rights in Armenia in 2011, United States Policy Towards the Armenian Question and the Armenian Genocide, 2005, The Downing of a C-130 and Post-State Utilization of the American Armenian Community, International History Review 2019, and most recently, Daniel Varoujan, L'Université de Gand, 1905 to 1909, in the Revue Belge de Philologie et d'Histoire in 2019-2020. So, Professor Payaslian, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. First, before I begin my presentation, I would like to thank Dr. Hago Panosyan for his kind invitation to present this study. And also many thanks to the ARPA Institute board for this opportunity. I have a couple more people I need to thank since this is my first time actually presenting this paper. Let me just share my screen. Okay. I would like to thank Professor Peter van Uffelen, the editor of this special issue on Daniel Varoujan. I would like to thank Hendrik de Voert, Erika ten Hoven at the Ghent University Archives, Jean-Paul de Clout, who assisted me in securing the addresses registered in the city archives in Ghent, and gave me a guided tour to the addresses where Varoujan had lived between 1905 and 1909. And one more for Ken Komendarian for his assistance at the Yereche Charins Museum of Literature and Art in Yerevan, Armenia. So let me just begin from my presentation. I hope my slides are useful. So let me know if you have any questions and so on. So we're all probably familiar with this bronze plaque at Ghent University. It was a plaque prepared by French sculptor Roger Baron for the commemoration event in 1958. Just this slide, I'm not going over this in detail, but I just thought I'd include this here for people who are not familiar with Daniel Varoujan's life. There is no need for us to discuss this in any detail, but this is Varoujan Chbukyaryan, moved to Constantinople in 1896, attended Armenian Catholic school there, continued his education at the Mkhitaris Murad Rafaelian School in Venice, and after graduation moved to Ghent University.
Mr. Payaslian, would you please put your slides on a slideshow?
It is?
On a full screen.
Oh, sorry.
On full screen. The first, yeah.
That's better, sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry. So this is where really my paper begins, at the unveiling ceremonies of the bronze dedication plaque in memory of Daniel Varoujan that took place on Sunday, February 9, 1958, at the main lobby, that's the book tower of Ghent University. And fortunately, we are really, really lucky that the organizers decided to publish a volume, a commemorative volume called Hushamadyan in 1958, containing tons of detailed information about the organizers of the event, people who attended the event, and so on and so forth. The background information. This is Hushamadyan. This is the commemorative volume. It's very, very difficult to find. It took me, I don't know how many months to get a copy of this, but fortunately I finally did. One of the main articles in there, written by Yervan Pambukian, actually offers an excellent background about the commemorative plaque, how it was organized and so on. And he also mentions that he was confident that this plaque would become a sacred site of pilgrimage for Armenians from around the world. And here is an example. This is me on pilgrimage, and this is at the entrance lobby of the main library. And this is the library, the book tower, famous building, I guess not only in Ghent, but globally as well. The way, this is just to give you background material. In 1957, apparently a number of students actually met in Brussels, trying to organize an event and to donate a bronze plaque to Varujan's memory. Initially, they were thinking about placing the plaque at one of the residences where Varujan had lived. Unfortunately, the name of the street is not mentioned in Hushamadian, and it was just virtually impossible to really find as to exactly what they had in mind. Remember, this is back in 1957, 1958. But as they discussed this, the organizers increasingly sort of gradually were concerned that just in case whatever the building is torn down in the future, the plaque itself would be destroyed as well. So they had this brilliant idea that they submitted a petition to the head administrator at Ghent University. And to their surprise, the university administration actually agreed. Not only agreed, but they actually helped them in organizing the ceremonies. So the unveiling ceremony took place, like I said, on February 9, 1958, by the Armenian Students Association, and among the organizers were Yervan Pambukian, Hagop Iskenderian, Edi Emirzian, Edi Zak, others as well. Attending the event were actually a large number of dignitaries, government officials, university professors, including among the attendees was Daniel Varoujan's wife, Araksi Varujan Apigyan. She had married before, so her name included the name Apigyan as well. And Pierre Mas, one of Varujan's closest friends, attended as well. So so this really became a major event. And I'm not really sure, we don't know, but I'm not really sure if a similar event Armenian students tried to organize at Ghent University, if they would really be able so successful in organizing such a major event. Maybe, but probably not. The community itself doesn't seem to be all that active in the first place. So it is clear, scholars agree, that Ghent University and Ghent city itself had enormous influence on Daniel Varoujan, his thinking, his philosophy, and so on and so forth. But most of the literature, well, actually all of the literature, they really focus on his writings, his poetry, his letters. So they try to analyze that material, and through those types of analysis also analyze Daniel Varoujan's philosophy. But even back then, Yervan Pambukian, in his article in Hushamadian, emphasized the point that we really need to do some kind of research on Varoujan's life and education in Belgium. And as surprising as it may seem, since 1958, actually since the genocide, we don't really have a single study of Daniel Varoujan at the University of Ghent and in Ghent City. I guess I'm totally honored to say that my paper, my study is really the first that actually looks at the archives of Ghent University and the archives of the city of Ghent to develop, prepare, offer a detailed analysis or study on Varoujan's life and education in Ghent. Varoujan arrived in Ghent in October 1905. He was forced to audit courses in literature and philosophy, forced audit because he hadn't been able to register as regular student. But in January, when the time came for him to register as regular student, he really changed his field. Rather than focusing on literature and philosophy, he changed his field to political economy and sociology, while also taking courses in history, psychology, law, and so on. There is absolutely no question that Daniel Varoujan absolutely appreciated the learning process at the university level. As difficult as his life was in Ghent, from his writings, it's very, very clear that he really enjoyed learning. Now, enjoyed learning, not every subject. Of course, there were, all of us who've been to universities, we know certain subjects we just don't like. But nevertheless, we go through the process. We go through the process anyway. In terms of the combination of influences, this is emphasized in the literature on Daniel Varoujan. The point is made that both Venice and Ghent exercise some serious influence on his imagination, some serious influence on his understanding of society and politics and culture and so on and so forth. But mostly, if you're familiar with his letters, he really emphasizes the role that Ghent University had in helping him understand society and politics and economy. Venice sort of remains in the realm of imagination for poetry. Ghent University becomes more and more important in his understanding of politics and so on. This is Ghent, the city itself. Absolutely beautiful. If you never had a chance to go there, highly, highly recommended. This is Ghent, early 1900s. This is the Korean market area. Ghent in early 1900s and Ghent today, the same Korean market area. This is Ghent again back then, just to give you a sense of the place. This is Ghent 1903, right before actually Daniel Varoujan came to the city. And this is Ghent University, and that's of course the book tower there. Now, in the literature on Daniel Varoujan, we don't really have any serious detailed discussion of Varoujan being in Ghent. So all of them mention that, yes, Daniel Varoujan went to study in Ghent, but we don't really have a detailed analysis. Putting Daniel Varoujan's studies in the context, the social, economic, political context of the city of Ghent really gives us a far better understanding of where Daniel Varoujan is coming from. Not in every single writing, but in general, most of his writings, the material written while he was at Ghent University and after, really give us a better understanding as to what his philosophy is, what his views are. The two major issues when he was there, the two major issues that were there, the division along linguistic lines, the struggle between whether Belgium or Ghent should remain French or move towards adopting Flemish language, and tensions between Catholics and socialist. So Daniel Varoujan walks into Ghent, and this issue about linguistic nationalism and socialism is already a major political issue. In Ghent, they were mostly Flemish speakers. Today it's even more, but mostly we're talking about Flemish territory. Flanders is basically a Flemish-speaking territory. There were also industries, and usually the argument is this is where Daniel Varoujan's socialism comes in. The fact that you're looking at a city that's more or less an industrial city, textile industry and so on, you have poor working conditions, living conditions, and he's actually witnessing all of that while he's in Ghent. There are labor unrest now and then, and you have a number of groups and their famous paper, their Vruut, stressing progress, struggle against injustice, struggle against ignorance, and so on and so forth. So we're talking about a city, a region that's being deeply influenced by socialist ideology, socialist movements. And Daniel Varoujan is very much witnessing, he's experiencing those movements. At the university itself, what was taking place outside the university is also taking place within the university. Linguistic nationalism, socialism. You have some professors, Paul Frederick, for example, advocating sort of a more balanced approach, what today, I guess, in the United States would be called multiculturalism or bilingualism, where that French and Flemish should have equal weight in university education. Others did disagree. They were saying, no, French should remain the dominant language. Socialist movements were also very active at Ghent University, and their almanac, university journal published by the students, the number of articles advocating socialist programs and so on. And again, Varoujan was very much part of that. There is no need for me to go into the details, except just to say that some of the professors, they were really famous. Paul Frederick probably being one of the most famous ones that got engaged in discussing French-Flemish debates and so on and so forth. And an important point about this is that Daniel Varoujan actually took courses with Paul Frederick. So he was very much learning about Flemishization, the debates about linguistic nationalism that were taking place. Other major professors, this is just short name. I should also mention Henri Pien. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this if you're in history. One of the giants of the giants, not only in Belgian history, but in world history, absolutely famous name. And actually, Varoujan became a very close friend with Pien and his son, the entire family, actually. In this general hostility and tensions about whether Belgians should go, or Ghent should maintain French language or Flemish language and so on. One of the major leaders that was praised with some nostalgia towards Flemish nationalism was Jacob van Artevelde. And here there's a major statue of him, what is City's Friday Market. And let me show you, I think I have, oops, oh, I thought I had pictures. All right, maybe we'll come to those pictures later. I know I have pictures in there. So it's a cosmopolitan campus. And just to give you some information, details about the nature of the university, a student enrollment, you have Belgian students, but also a growing number of foreign students. When Daniel Varoujan was there, there were actually other Armenian students as well. Two names that I was able to find in the university archives was Gregory Khambekian and Bogosian. Unfortunately, I don't really have, I didn't have time to do further research on those two students. It would have been fascinating to have time and see what other information I could find. In 1909, the year when Daniel Varoujan graduated, there were 17 students, including from Turkey, including Ottoman Armenia, and there was the Turkish students from Turkey were the third largest group among the foreign students at the university. So when Varoujan is going there, there is some kind of community, but one of the, I'll discuss this in a minute, one of the major problems he had was the fact that he didn't find an active Armenian community there. And he was totally depressed about the fact that there was no active Armenian community there. One of the most fascinating stuff is actually finding Daniel Varoujan's student ID numbers in the university records. Imagine the extent to which all the information, all the details that the university has actually kept for years and years and years. And if you look at those documents, you'll see Daniel Varoujan's obviously address, student ID number, where he's from, and most importantly for me, the addresses where he lived in Ghent. And for me, that was a major, major advantage, because then I was able to actually find the places where he lived. This is university certification of registration. This the material that's available. This is another certification. So what you really see here is the university maintaining detailed information about their students. And then the trick was for me to find those addresses and then to take them to the city hall. And Jean-Paul, my friend Jean-Paul, actually helped me with the entire process, gaining the archival material from City Hall and being able to identify the buildings where Daniel Varoujan actually lived. He resided in the 5 different addresses between 1905 and 1909, except there was this brief period in August 1907 where there's a 6th address. And that's Hotel St. Joseph in Ustakar, Lourdes, and I'll talk about this in a minute. So those are the addresses, Varoujan's addresses back in 1905, 1909. Varoujan, or the buildings that we have in 2014 when I was there and taking pictures. And those are, this was French. But after 1930s, the government issued a whole bunch of policies introducing laws for the transition from French to Flemish names for the streets. And again, it's just absolutely fascinating that the city archives had actually kept all that information. I mean, look at this. This is just incredible that they would actually, you would be able to go there in 2014 and find, and Jean-Paul was saying they actually have all the details in terms of, each year, what the addresses were for each street, for each building. That is just absolutely fascinating stuff and helping to find places. So this is one place. This is Avenue des Arts back when, and this address actually appears in his papers. And this is what it is today, for 2014, when I went there to take those pictures. This is the building. In the Hushamatian, they're saying 2-story building. I'm not really sure how they defined 2-story building. I wish there was more information in there, but unfortunately, there wasn't. This is basically what the street looks like today. This is another street, and this is basically the building, two-story. But then again, I'm not sure if this was really what they had in mind. This is what the street looks like today. This is another street, and it was in this it was in this street. No, it was this one. Sorry, it was this one. This one here. Sorry, it was this one here. We were there, Jean-Paul and I and my wife RP. We were there to take pictures of the building, and we were outside. And Jean-Paul noticed that there were women at the windows. Apparently, we were in their Ghent's red light district. So Jean-Paul actually went inside and told the manager there, could you please ask the ladies to move away from the windows because we're supposed to be taking pictures outside. So we took pictures. It was just funny the way Jean-Paul actually had to run in to tell them to walk away. Now, in this case, the buildings are new buildings. So the old building no longer exists, even though the number 35, is still there. But according to city archive records, they no longer exist. This is another one. In this case, the building exists, but the numbers have changed a number of times. So it was very difficult to figure out. And this is the kind of building you're looking at. And it was very difficult to figure out which part of the building would be where Daniel Varoujan would have lived in. Plus, the other problem with those buildings is Daniel Varoujan, I mean, once in a while he mentions he's looking through the window and he sees whatever, but he doesn't really give a description. At least in the archives, I haven't been able to find any. Doesn't give any detailed description in terms of what kind of apartment he's in. What does the internal of the apartment, the interior actually look like? He doesn't really say anything about that. I wish we would have a better sense of that. So classes begin on October 15, 1905, and Varoujan comes in late, about a week after. So as I was saying before, he doesn't register as a regular student, just auditing courses. And eventually he decides that he's interested in doing political science and sociology and law. And those are some of the courses. There's an entire documentation of this. So if you go to the university archives, we got files and files of material that you can actually check and see what the course program was for each academic year, which professors are teaching what courses. And then in the student archives, the documentation, they also mention the type of courses the students are taking. Just enormous amount of material actually just sitting there waiting for people to go there and do research. But unfortunately, we don't have many people doing this kind of research. This is Henri Pirenne, Paul Frederick, just professors' pictures, Bivrian, Vermisch, Belge. Oh, this is what I was talking about. University course schedule offered by different professors. And it was increasingly became more and more interested in political economy, in economic history and finance. He was taking courses in law, but very much like I have here. In one of his letters to Ashak Chobanyan, he says, I'm really tired of dealing with legal issues. I would prefer to work on my poem on Armenuhi, but I'm falling behind because I just can't focus on that work because he has to deal with course material in law. So I don't think he really enjoyed studying law, even though I think he very much enjoyed studying political economy. And later on, when he was teaching at Surkriko Lusavric School in Istanbul, he was actually offering courses on political economy. In his notes, he has Kakagan Dundesutun, referring to the courses he's teaching. This is a university registration card. Again, courses that he was taking with professors of modern political history, logic, psychology, sociology, and after the examination, one of the students that he took the exam with passed with great distinction, and Varujan passed with distinction. In the literature, I can't remember exactly where I saw those, couple places. The authors mentioned that he passed those exams with great distinction. That's not in the records. The records indicate distinction or satisfaction, with distinction or with satisfaction, but not with great distinction. So I guess it's important to compare or to see the actual archival material. Another course material and exams. And look at the courses he's taking: civil law, international law, parliamentary history of Belgium, public law. And again, for this examination, he passed with satisfaction, and he was advanced to becoming a candidate for the degree of political science. And while he was there, Varujan, actually, to some extent, he was very successful in making friends very, very quickly. And as I was saying before, Pierre Maz was probably his closest friend, and Henri Pirenne and his family and his son and so on. They all became very good friends. But at the same time, and he mentions this in his letters, he talks about his life in Ghent, and I have the quote here: the most difficult period in his life. I was able to, based on his writings and in the archival material, I was able to sort of identify, and this required much more detailed research than I was able to do. Just general homesickness, nostalgia, his financial situation, and then there was a Belgian woman. And then let me just cover. Yeah, so this is Baz. Pierre Maz pictures from Yeroshye Charen's Museum of Literature and Art. Daniel Varoujan and Pierre Maz. That's a great picture, especially Daniel Varoujan's hat. One major issue he struggles with is disillusionment with the Armenian community there. He is sad about the fact that he doesn't really see a lively Armenian community, and he complains about the fact that Armenians, not all of them, but I guess some of them, don't really know the language, they can't really understand him, they don't have a good sense of Armenian identity, Armenian culture. He also complains that not only that, but just the general environment in Ghent isn't really much of a cultural environment. And that's not surprising because, well, you're looking at basically industrial city. So the only place you're going to find an intellectual environment, it would be on campus in the university. And we experience the same here in the United States. There isn't really much of a cultural environment out there. The only place you're going to find cultural environment is when you're on campus. Outside the campus, it's not going to happen. So maybe, and a number of scholars have suggested this, precisely because this absence of cultural environment, his main inspirations for his work really came from his memories of his childhood in the homeland. So he's combining, if you follow that argument, he's combining his memories of his childhood in the homeland with issues related to linguistic nationalism, socialism, and so on. But I'll spend a couple of minutes later on. He's much more than that. Even though the literature, they emphasize socialism, nationalism, so on, but Daniel Varoujan's works, once you have a better understanding of this background, you can actually see how much more cosmopolitan, how much more universalistic his writings are, rather than just socialism or nationalism. And to some extent, my guess is that socialism part was emphasized because of some of the publications in Soviet Armenia during the Soviet period, and the nationalism component was emphasized by Armenians in the diaspora. So that's very much probably that's very. And Daniel Varoujan is, based on my assessment, and I could be totally wrong, based on my assessment, the most cosmopolitan writer in early 20th century. The closest I can think of that came in the 20th century would be Baruch Sevak, in terms of cosmopolitan orientation of his philosophy, of his views. So it's kind of wrong to see Daniel Varoujan as socialist nationalist. He was much, much more than that. That's for sure. The financial situation, that is really, I mean, we could really spend, I don't know, a long time discussing this. Now, usually in the literature, we're told that he was poor. Obviously, he was poor, but it's also possible that maybe he mismanaged his finances, or he really didn't have enough money. Now, my article that I have published sort of follows the second view, that he didn't have enough money. It'd be interesting, just for the sake of experimentation, to think about him as mismanaging his finances. That would give us totally different view. But this requires far more detailed analysis than I was able to do in my. I followed the normally traditionally established view without necessarily having detailed analysis to challenge. Maybe it's possible that somebody else could come in and actually do a detailed analysis and challenge that view. For example, my friend Jean-Paul was saying that based on his knowledge of Ghent and the economic conditions in Ghent at the time, the money that he had, the amount of money that he had wasn't really that bad. It's possible that his close circle of friends were really wealthy. They're coming from wealthy families. So therefore, as a result, maybe he felt like he was obviously in worse shape than his friends. But that really needs to be examined. And if that's the case, then our entire view of Daniel Varoujan being poor in Ghent could really very much change. But that's, I wish I had time. I don't think I'm gonna have time to work on that project. Hopefully somebody else will. Just to give you a sense in terms of how detailed information he has kept. The numbers that you see here, this is from his papers, Yershi Challenge Museum in Yerevan. The numbers you see here are the numbers in the first column you see here. Oops. Here, this is what you're seeing here. Most of this material is also published in Liagadar Yergeri Jogovatsu, published in Yerevan, the 3-volume material with the letters and so on and so forth. There is no need for me to spend time with this, but let me just go to his. Now, the other problem he had was apparently he had fallen in love with a Belgian woman. And for whatever reason, there is really, unless this material is in the archives and I couldn't find them, it's possible that first, we don't know her name. And apparently she was the one that actually ended the affair. And he, in a letter to Teranik Cizmecian, he says, "When I just totally deep psychological depression." And when I remember the first time when I was reading this, I was thinking it would have been really fascinating if she actually mentioned her name. And imagine about 100 years later, going to that woman's family and saying, and and then being able to actually analyze or interview members of their family, if her family ever even would remember or have information about that. Probably not. So then, for this reason, he actually goes to spend a couple of days at Hotel St. Joseph in Ustak. At the time, Ustak also outskirts of Ghent, even though today it's very much part of Ghent. And that's where he writes his poem, Lakum, Abandonment, while he was staying at Hotel. Now, it's not really clear whether he actually finished it there or he started writing there and wrote and completed. He was definitely a very fast writer. There's no question about that. Writing came extremely natural for him. So it's possible that that's where he wrote and that's where he completed. This is what the hotel was back in August 1907 when he went there. And of course, I was able to find the address. This is what it looks like today. I mean, just think, look at the structure, the exact same structure, including the windows and everything, except, well, back then it was a hotel. Now it's a flower shop. And this is the street. St. Joseph is very much on there. This is myself and my wife, RP. We went there. And this is Jean-Paul, who actually took me to all those addresses. Just absolutely super wonderful person. Without his help, there's no way I'd be able to find all this material. And this is inside, flower shop, and this is exactly walk indoors, and this is exactly what you see. First floor and second floor. I'm assuming it was the second floor where guests had to stay. Unfortunately, the owner, she was really willing to help me explain, describe, and so on and so forth. But she was saying that the previous owner hadn't really left a lot of information about the history of the place. So she really doesn't know much of anything about early 20th century. Now, having seen this, when I was there for my sabbatical, for spring semester of 2018, I was planning before I actually went there. I had seen the place in the previous visit. Then this time I was hoping to just grab some flowers, buy some flowers, and take those flowers to the university library where his Daniel Varoujan's plaque is, and actually put it there. For me, that would have been very important. But unfortunately, when I was there, the library was going through major renovation, and I just couldn't go inside. And the plaque had been moved because the wall was being repainted or whatever. So that's a future later on. But this affair, which failed, probably represented the furthest emotional distance Varujan psychologically traveled from his Armenian roots. And I think I could demonstrate this in his writings. The fact that that relationship failed really forced him, that disillusionment, that pain, really forced him to focus much more clearly on the homeland. In a number of writings, and this is just one letter, he mentions that he was so totally lonely, dejected. Actually, even thought about committing suicide. Solo e soleto alone and totally alone. This is January 1908. Even later on, he referred to his years in Ghent as very, very difficult, most difficult. Now, regardless of those difficulties, look at the number of poems that he has actually produced while he was there. I counted about 40 of them. Maybe there were more, but at least 40 of them. 1905, this is November, so now he's in Gand. 1906, 1907, this is the abandonment, Lacombe. 1908, to the statue of Van Artevelde. That's really an essay rather than a poem. And this here. So we're talking about enormous production while he's taking courses, while he's in major depression. But nevertheless, he was able to produce all this work. At the university, the university, as I was saying before, published the university almanac, and he had 3 pieces in French published there. The Première Péché, that was French translation of his Arachin Merke. It was just basically direct French translation. À la statue de Van Artevelde, that's an essay, and the Berceau de ma partie, poem for Armenian, that's in French as well. When he sent a copy of this essay to about Van Artevelde to Ashak Chobanyan, Daniel Varoujan in the letter mentioned that he wrote this in part because he just wanted to practice his French. That's just to make sure that he's most likely Pierre Mas, Pierre Mas was on the editorial board of the journal. Most likely Pierre Mas actually helped him to do the polishing and so on and so forth, make sure everything looks fine. And this is the statue back then. This is the statue today, and this is the Friday market. Just absolutely wonderful place. A whole bunch of restaurants and so on and so forth. Highly, highly recommended. He organized public lectures. He was hoping he would be able to create some energy in the Armenian community, if not necessarily specifically in Ghent, but in Brussels, in Belgium. My guess is he wasn't really all that successful at the time, and he finally graduated, took the final exam July 16. And in this, and I'll probably stop with this one. I could go on forever with this, but I'll stop with his graduation and see if people have any questions. So here you have, there was Varujan and another student, the Pinho, they've scheduled their final exam at 10 a.m. for their BA degree in political science. So here, the final committee actually meets, but the 2 students don't really show up. They're not there. Instead of going to the actual final committee, they had gone to a totally different building, to a totally different committee at 10 a.m. as a scheduled sharp. Except, they go to the committee, and that committee, the wrong committee, looks at the registration forms and tells them, look, guys, you're in the wrong place. This is the wrong committee. This is a committee on trade, commerce. This is not the committee on political science. And then, fortunately, immediately, the political science, the real committee, was notified. And then sort of they rescheduled the registration, took care of the registration, and they met at 3 p.m. For the final exam. The students went to the right building for the right examination. And those are basically the professors that examined them. And the chair of the committee declared that Daniel Varoujan had satisfactorily completed the examination, therefore was granted the BA degree in political science. I think I have like about 50 more slides. But let me just show you some pictures at least of things. Let me just. This is the material. Oh, well, I should mention this. Uh, Unfortunately, it's people seem to believe, and this is in the scholarship. People seem to believe that the 3 volumes that we have, Liagadar Yerkeri Jehovah'ın, the 3 volumes, everything that has survived from Daniel Varoujan is published in those 3 volumes. That is not correct. If you go to Yerishe Charent's Museum of Literature and Art in Yerevan, you will see this enormous amount of material that were saved. And over the years, different people from different places who have original copies of whatever they have, including Simon Vratsian from Jamaran in Beirut, sent material to the library to make sure that they have as complete material documentation as possible. And this is just one example here. This is Kakagand'ın Desutyun notes, notes from lectures in Ghent, notes that he prepared when he began to teach in Istanbul. So those are over there. This is the notebook right here. İmasta Sirutyun, Hayren, Kakagand'ın Desutyun. He's teaching that stuff at Surkrikov Lusavuric School. He's teaching Payaslian. This is Arshagovi Teotik's book. This is the book that he was actually using to teach Payaslian. This was how he was trying to learn, improve his French while he was in Ghent. The French is here, and the Armenian translation, the translation is here. Whew. I shall stop. Any questions? I hope that wasn't too fast. I could really go on forever and forever, but some other time. Any questions, any comments? I would really love to hear comments.
Thank you, Simon, for this very interesting presentation. Yes, actually, we have one comment. He says, from Sami, he says, very interesting preservation of hotel he stayed in with conservative ideology of the Belgians, which coincides with Armenian ideology of historic preservation with destructive ideology of neighboring countries.
I don't see Belgium as being conservative. It does have, very much like any other country, they have conservative people. For example, the closer you move towards Brussels, it gets more and more conservative. Again, we're not talking about 100%. This is just general outline. In Flanders, West, there are nationalists, there are liberal, just like any other country. That preservation aspect of it, I'm not sure if that's really anything to do with preservation of the document or preservation of the buildings and so on. That's cultural, the ability, both the political will, but also the finances that are required to preserve that material. I mean, for the university to be able to employ staff at the archives, university archives, well, that requires money. Keeping those documents safe in actually excellent condition. That requires professional staff, and that requires serious money. I'm not sure if archives in Armenia really have that level of financial strength or the same level of professionalism. Maybe down the road they will, but who knows? Remains to be seen.
Lisa Manoyan is asking if you could show the student ID of Daniel Varoujan.
Sure. Screen share. Student ID. Oops. Oh. How come it's not doing anything?
It's not coming up.
Nope.
Jura,
Ah, there we go.
there it is.
Which one? The ID numbers?
Just
Or
the ID, I guess, the picture of the
or
ID.
the pictures. Yeah. This is the ID numbers.
That's the certificate, okay.
Some of them, I think some of them were at Yereşe Challenge Museum. I have this in my notes as to exactly what came from where, but there are just so many documents that I don't remember exactly which one came from Ghent and which one from Yerevan.
Rachel M. is asking, how did Varoujan's materials survive after the genocide?
As far as I know, and that in itself could be a fascinating study, as far as I know, his wife, Araksi, was able to save and rescue them. As to exactly how they traveled from Bolis to Yerevan, I really don't know. And I couldn't find any information, at least, I mean, the archives are huge in Yerevan. There's huge archives. So it would really require at least one full year of spending there to go through those archives. Unfortunately, I never have that kind of time. So it's possible that in the archival materials, that information is there. I was just focusing on Daniel Varoujan in Ghent. So anything else that didn't deal with Ghent, I just couldn't pay attention to. Just focused on Ghent and Ghent University. That's the only time I had to cover those. So it would be fascinating to go through those archival materials. And I imagine there has to be something. I mean, for example, as I mentioned, I was able to find Simon Varatsian's letters, sending some documents to, I can't remember which poem. He sent from Jamaran in Beirut to the archives in Yerevan. I wish I had included that in my slides, but I think it was 1961 or 62, the letter was dated. And other people did the same thing. Other people, his friends, who, whatever they had, they sent them to the archives. And fortunately, they did. They've survived. They really survived.
Shora is asking, after completing his studies, what year did he return to Armenia?
1909.
1909.
He completed his education in July 1909, and immediately he returned to Brgnik, to his village. Let me show you the. Let me show you. Yeah, there we go. This is. Can you see this slide? This basically gives you returned to home 1909, and he was offered a teaching position at Armenian school, and then in Tokat, and then married, and then moved to Constantinople to be the principal of St. Surp Krikor Lusavric School. And most of you probably know that's where also he worked to produce Navasart, and then worked with Zorian and so on to produce Mehyan. Whole bunch of problems with Mehyan, but he tried to work with it. One fascinating point about this, and this, it doesn't, I mean, we really don't think about it, but as you're going through the archival material, one fascinating point that came to my attention was that close relationship that we think Daniel Varoujan and Siamanto had. I mean, in our minds, Siamanto and Daniel Varoujan sort of go together. In real life, in the archives, I don't think that was the case. I think that's a construction after the genocide. In the diaspora, when diaspora journalists, writers, very much like I was saying before, they were focusing on Daniel Varoujan's nationalism aspect of it. And therefore, of course, Siamanto nationalism. Siamanto was far, far more seriously nationalist. Daniel Varoujan was, but as I was saying before, Daniel Varoujan was much, much more complicated than Siamanto. And the two, as far as I know, based on the material, if I remember correctly, the two met for the first time in Switzerland, 1906. They had good relations. They respected each other. I think Daniel Varoujan respected Siamanto more than Siamanto respected Daniel Varoujan. But then again, that would be fascinating research right there. It'd be very, very important to find papers of Siamanto and then work on them. I think the Genocide Museum has some of that material, but I didn't, like I said, I didn't have time to look at it. But it's, to me, it's very, very clear that the combined Siamanto, Daniel Varoujan names that we have in our heads really came after the genocide. In real life, I really don't think they were that close. Daniel Varoujan, I think he once gave a public talk about Siamanto's writings. I don't think Siamanto ever gave a talk of Daniel Varoujan's writing. But then again, that really needs to be examined. That in itself is really fascinating. I was able to find Siamanto's address in Geneva, Switzerland, but that never really have time. I don't think I'm going to have time. I have so many projects. I don't think I'm going to have time to actually look into that. But maybe.
Tatevi Gaivazyan asks. She says, "Can you comment on the unpublished works you've seen at the Charents Museum? What sort of poems and works are they?"
There were. I wish I have tons of pictures of the papers, but the ones that I showed, most of them are in that quality, handwritten, a whole bunch of corrections. Ink spilled over some of those pages. I don't know if anybody would be interested in actually looking at them and correcting them and publishing them. The material published in the 3 volumes in Yergeri Liagadarjo, 2 volumes are, if I remember correctly, 2 volumes are poetry. So there's tons of material there. 1 volume includes his essays and letters and so on. Those essays, nobody has actually, and that's a fundamental problem in the scholarship, as I think I mentioned in my presentation. Those essays have been totally neglected when scholars are writing about Daniel Varoujan's philosophy and his views. I mean, imagine he had material on taxation in general, political economy of taxation, and taxation in the Ottoman Empire, and what type of taxation would work in the Ottoman Empire, what type of taxation would not work in the Ottoman Empire. But so there's this stereotypical, limited view confined to Daniel Varoujan, just in the context of his poetry. But as to exactly how much more material, there is tons of material in his archives. But somebody should go there, and not only just somebody, number of people should, like a group, a team, should really go there and examine them. So that's a project. That's a major project. And once in a while, when students ask me to do graduate work, and I mention this stuff to them, like, do a PhD in Armenian history, Armenian literature. They sort of look at me as if I've lost my mind because they're thinking more about things like nationalism in the Ottoman Empire, for example. Whatever. That's their interest.
Professor Varoujan is asking, what is the possibility of placing commemorative plaques around Ghent to mark some of the buildings where Daniel Varoujan lived and studied?
Oh, that's a great idea. I wish, I wish we could. Based on my conversations with people there, when 1958 was quite different than 2014, 2021. At the time, there was no huge Turkish population in Belgium. There was no huge Turkish population in Ghent, but now there's huge population. And their argument is that if the students were trying today to place that plaque at the university, most likely the administration would not allow them. I guess it's definitely worth giving a try. It would take some time and energy and lobbying and so on. I wouldn't really be all that optimistic about that. And plus, not only government permission, but if those buildings are owned by private owners, why would they?
Yeah.
Like, from our point of view, it's emotionally charged issue. And I would love to put Daniel Varoujan's plaque all over the city. Again, by the river, by the restaurant, it's everywhere. Especially the flower shop. That would have just absolutely wonderful. But they're private properties, and it's one thing when the owner is very kind and gives me permission to go inside and take pictures. My guess is it would be a totally different ball game to add something to the building or wherever.
Varujan is asking, he says, many Armenians studied in Europe. What drove you to study, to investigate the history of Daniel Varoujan?
First and foremost, that very precise plaque that's there at the library, and Yerban Pambukyan's comment in the Hushamagya. That said, excuse me. That said that needs to be studied. And the more I thought about it, I realized that it's maybe doable. So first and foremost, I checked with the library at the Boston Library staff, and they contacted Ghent Library, and they were able to get some documents with a message that if Professor Payaslian would like to see more documents, it'd be much easier if he actually comes to the library. So I think the first time I went there must have been 2013. And then I went there 2014, and then I actually spent an entire sabbatical in the spring semester of 2018 at Ghent University. And to some extent, the purpose of the sabbatical was, to do research, but I just wanted to get a feel, real concrete feel. What is it like for Daniel Varoujan to actually live there among the students in the student buildings? And I'm not, there isn't really that much material about how he saw the students, unless again, it's possible that he has written that material, but I haven't seen them. I know for sure they are not in the letters published in Liagadar Jovazu. I don't think he mentions anything about the students, but except complaining about the Armenian community. But that's how it started. Basically read Pambukyan's statement that I showed in my presentation and began to think more seriously about it. And I said, okay, let's see what happens. And this is exactly what happened. Plus, Gand, just absolutely beautiful place. I mean, just imagine the river that I showed you There are a whole bunch of restaurants. Imagine just sitting there at one of those restaurants and drinking some cold beer. What could what could be better? And then there's that Vroot restaurant. Major, it used to be a socialist building back in early 20th century. It's no longer socialist, but now it's basically a restaurant. Just absolutely great places, beautiful, beautiful city. Bruges as well. And I think it also helps that I was fortunate to find a local expert like Jean-Paul, who basically guided me through all those places.
Armen Marsubian is asking, do you know if he corresponded with his friends or professors in Ghent once the war began and the Germans invaded? There was much in the way of atrocities taking place in those days.
I I don't remember seeing. Once he came to Brgnik and Istanbul, when he was preparing his lectures to teach at Surkriko Lusavuric, he contacted one student in Ghent, asking for one of the lecture notes from one of professors' courses in political economy and international law. I'm not sure if that student replied. Maybe those documents are there. I didn't see that material. So he relied more or less what he himself had from the lecture notes and so on. There were some postcards that he sent to Pierre Maz, but I don't really know if there was any extensive letter writing. Probably not. Paul Frederick, he was very much against the war and actually got arrested because he was Paul Frederick was against the war. But I don't think there was really any contacts. He liked writing to his professors. He wrote to Paul Frederick, for example, thanking him for his course in history, and other professors thanking them for their courses in psychology. And in the literature, there is no need for us to go into details there. But I've mentioned this in my article. But there was some confusion by those studying Daniel Varoujan and his letters as to what letter is going to whom. So there is some confusion there, and that confusion is there because they didn't have access to the archives. But once you have access to the archives at Ghent University, you get a more concrete sense as to what letters he is writing to which professor. If I remember correctly, in one of the studies published 1960s or whatever for one of the Soviet Armenian Daniel Varoujan Gainka course type of publication, the author had mentioned that Daniel Varoujan thanked Paul Frederick for his course on psychology. Paul Frederick never taught any courses on psychology. It's basically some kind of a confusion as to exactly what was going on. But that's a long story.
Council is asking, it would be nice to see to analyze the connection between Varoujan's life and his poetry.
It would require some serious work. It would really require, one of the things that I learned when I did this research was that how much we didn't really, or we don't know about Daniel Varoujan. And to some extent, we don't know much about Daniel Varoujan precisely because all we have in the literature is this focus on his poetry and socialism, or his poetry and nationalism, Nietzsche, and so on and so forth. So we haven't really gone beyond that. Krikor Beledian, of course, has done some excellent works on this, but it needs much more concrete association with Daniel Varoujan, his life and his poetry. One issue that has been neglected in the literature, this has not been mentioned by any scholar, That is, Daniel Varoujan really was experimenting with literature and that's an important point because he was able to do that experimentation in the culturally more liberal environment in Ghent. He experimented in different shapes, realism, classicism, mythology, and so on and so forth. He experimented with a whole bunch of different approaches. And I remember very vividly in one of his letters, he does mention that he does not believe in schools of thought in literature, that you should be able to produce literature in a culturally free environment without any cultural restrictions. And that he was able to do that in Ghent. And that's probably a far more significant influence on Daniel Varoujan's work than socialism or nationalism. His ability to experiment with a whole bunch of different approaches, which he could not in Sebastia, he could not in Constantinople. He actually complained, especially about Sebastia. He complained about how restrictive the local culture was. So while he's in Ghent, he's constantly imagining about his homeland. He's imagining about Brgnik and life in the village. And you very easily see that in his poetry. But once he actually comes to Brgnik, he actually can't wait to get out of there, precisely because now, this guy has been away since 1902. No, actually, since 1896, when he first went to Constantinople. He's been away for years. And then while he's imagining his homeland, well, he has really changed. And then he comes to the homeland only to realize that there's a huge discrepancy, disconnect between his imagination of his village and the actual village itself. And then he very quickly moves to Constantinople, and then we know what happened in Constantinople.
Irina Varzhabedyan is asking if she could see the slide where there is a chronological date of Varoujan's life, education, where he lived, and so on.
This one here?
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
This is the only chronological material that I have. I'm hoping the dates are correct. I haven't done any typos. Does anybody see any typos?
No.
No.
Zovi Glibaryan is asking, is this Yervan Pamukyan the same as the Yervan Pamukyan in Beirut?
Yes.
Yes.
And I went there to the Antillas Gatolgosaran had organized the centennial for the independence of the Republic of Armenia in 1918, and I was honored to be there. And that's where, for the first time, I met him. And then I also saw him in Yerevan for a conference. We talked about it. But unfortunately, you go to those conferences and people are busy. So I was hoping to have another opportunity to actually sit down, have for a longer period of time. And he actually remembered. Of course, he remembered Gand and organizing the event and so on. But it was just my problem that I wasn't able to put together some free time to actually sit down and discuss this with him more fully. We discussed, but not really as much as I would like to.
Armen Masrubian is making a comment. He says his great uncle Aram Dildilian, in his memoirs, he has written about his hearing of Varoujan's lecture on politics and read his poetry in Samsun in May 1912. He said Varoujan was very pessimistic about the future, according to the memoirs.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. He was, well, you sort of have two, I guess you could have two views. pessimistic, but at the same time, he was also publishing Navasart, 1914. And if you look at Navasart, you could very easily see that he's expressing hope that those types of journals, Mehian as well, but especially Navasart for him, he lost control with, against Zorian, a whole bunch of the, problems with that group. But Navasart was really his, and you can see him express hope in that journal, and he was also hoping that that was the first volume, and he was also planning to publish the second volume. So that's the optimistic side of it. But when it came to politics, yeah, he was really very pessimistic. And that you can very easily see that in his papers. So if you just look at the 3 volumes, Diagadar, Yergeri Johovadzu, it's in there kind of here and there, but it's not really all that clear. But if you look at his archival material, even just the fact that I didn't have time to look at all of them, but still you really get that sense and there was also communication when I was in Venice, Surkazar, Vank, and there was some documents there as well. It wasn't really clear whether it was Siamanto to Varujan or Varujan to, I think it was from Siamanto to Varujan, mentioning the point that in Constantinople, Siamanto was very much concerned about the second conscription that was coming up, military conscription. And if I remember correctly, there's this very short note saying we should probably get out of this place as soon as possible. But then, of course, that's not really what happened. Yeah, they were very pessimistic. People, when you hear people lecturing about the genocide, they seem to suggest that, well, first, there's really no discussion as to exactly how these people really felt. How did they see what was actually taking place around them? And there were a number of intellectuals, if you read their writings, clearly stating that, for example, what's going on between Russia and the Ottoman government and the European powers, early 1914, that given the fact that the Armenian population has no control over those policies, that this is a huge danger, huge red flag for the Armenian population. And having said that, then the other question, okay, so now that you're sensing that you're looking at some kind of a danger, knowing about it or thinking about it is one thing. To be able to do something about it is really quite different. So even if those intellectuals were concerned and expressed their concerns in their letters or whatever, they really didn't know how to deal with the problem. They were not necessarily... Sorry, yeah.
Catherine Dedeyan is asking whether the pagan songs were written in Belgium.
Yeah, part of it, yeah, sure, of course, yeah, sure, yeah. Yeah, part
and
of it.
Sammy is asking, was he a Catholic?
He was Catholic. But obviously by just actually in terms of his intellectual evolution, it's fascinating that first he goes to Mkhitarist school from 1902 to 1905 for his education. And from that conservative Catholic institution, he actually goes to Ghent University, that sort of huge socialist movements and so on and so forth. Now, having said that, he was definitely Catholic. Obviously, then he moves towards paganism and so on and so forth, but not necessarily totally ignoring religion or God. So it's in his writings, he does refer to God and so on. Maybe that's just rhetorical, but nevertheless, it's fascinating that there was that transition in the chronological sequence of events But you could very easily see, even before Ghent, he had socialist views, or what later would become socialist views. I think those were there. I mean, he had seen his father's life in Constantinople. He had seen the poverty and injustices, 1896 massacres. And so he had seen that. So there was no question in terms of that he, from whatever age, he was already had a worldview that was socialist. But what Ghent University actually did was refortify it, made it much more systematic for him, made it have a much more sophisticated understanding of his own views, of his own life. So by the time he's done with Ghent University, he is really, really, really sophisticated intellectual. And his writings then actually are much more sophisticated than most of the Armenian writers in the 20th century. And I haven't read every single one of everything in the 20th century, but I'm familiar with the major names. Charents, all the way to Shira, Silva Gabudigan, Baruch Sevag, I'm familiar. And Western, right? I'm familiar with them. But other, like I said, other than Baruch Sevag, none of them can actually come anywhere near Daniel Varoujan. But unfortunately, the younger generation, they really know nothing about that stuff. Forget about knowing; they can't even read the original Armenian. But that's that's how it is.
Lisa Manoyan says, does anyone know anything about Daniel Varoujan's children, where they are and their grandchildren, and are they involved in Armenian life or not?
They were, well, Araksi and family moved to Fresno. That's when Araksi died, 1967. And later on, her children, their children just basically went all over the place. There is one granddaughter, I think. I can't remember her name. I remember seeing her name. She mentions that she is the granddaughter of Daniel Varoujan, but I don't know about them, so I don't really know that. I really don't. It's possible that they're similar to a whole bunch of other Armenian leaders that they're in the United States or France or England or Brazil, Argentina or whatever. Their life is so different from Daniel Varoujan's life that Daniel Varoujan, the background maybe doesn't even seem all that relevant whatsoever. And I've seen especially people in LA, you see some the children of Armenian leaders come and you ask them questions, they're just just totally clueless about the famous families they're coming from. They probably even changed their last names.
Irina is asking, what happened to his father who was imprisoned?
I think I don't think he died in prison, but I haven't really followed his father's life. So I just basically intellectually went with Daniel Varoujan wherever Daniel Varoujan went. So I haven't looked into his, the life of his family and so on. Araksi got married with, I think his name was Girard Apigyan. And initially they came to New York. And then I think Girard Apigyan passed away. I could be wrong, but I think he passed away in New York, and then Araksi was in Fresno, and that's where Araksi died.
Maya Babumyan says his daughter Veronica passed away in New York in 2009.
Yeah, that's it. Yes, Veronica. Yes, that's right. That's her name. Oh, she passed away. I see. Yeah, that's Veronica. That's right. Good. Wow. Thank you. That's great. I can't remember her last name. It wasn't Varujan. I can't remember her. Veronica Schumbert or Schumbert, but yeah, Veronica. Oh, that's really great. Yeah.
I guess that's, let's see, Tatevik Ayvazyan says Armen's descendants are in France and use Chubukyan,
Varujan.
Yeah. Varujan Kazanyan says 2 grandchildren, Daniel and Vartan, live in Oregon.
Oh, really? Oregon? Oh, that's really great. Huh.
And then Tatevi Gavazian says Veronica was Safrasian.
Yeah.
I guess that's all the questions and the comments. So thank you very much, Professor Payaslian.
Datevik Ayvazyan is mentioning that her granddaughter was Schumberg. That's correct. That's the last I was thinking, right?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Professor Payaslian, for this very interesting and
so much
detailed
for
presentation.
organizing, for your invitation. Thank you so very much. Please stay, all of you, please stay safe and healthy.
Yes. Thank you, everybody, for following all the events. And if you are, again, if you want to help ARPA, please go to our website and make a donation. We would appreciate it. Thank you very much.
And we should thank Jora as well for his technical expertise.
Thank you, Jora. Yes. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.